All right, thanks so much for joining us. This is Moms with the Mic, Julia Bagg and Marissa Bagg, and we are glad that you are with us. We're talking back to school. We're getting ready for back to school. Okay.
Sorry, Jewel, go ahead. I think the countdown was still on. Let's go ahead and get started.
All right,
you were doing the intro.
Yeah, we're talking about getting ready for back to school. Some kids are already in school, and of course, Miami-Dade Public Schools starts next Wednesday. Broward Schools for Marissa's family starts next Tuesday. And hey, we want to talk about getting organized, mentally preparing our kids, keeping them back to school ready, and also ready like mental health wise, right? And so we've got some guests to join us this morning. And first we want to bring on Dr. Marina Villani-Capo, who is a pediatric psychologist, a clinical psychologist. Hi there, Dr. Villani-Capo. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Yeah, we're so excited to talk about this topic. Julia and I have younger kids that are just getting into pre-K for the first time. So we're just starting our journey into getting ready for school. And we know from friends and obviously going to school ourselves that it can be an exciting but overwhelming time. So we're happy to have you here to help share with parents and kind of give them the information, the tools they need to start this new year.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, okay, let's talk about it. Families are gearing up for the new year. Some, maybe like my own son, is starting a new school. And so we've got, it's natural, right, to have those first day jitters. But sometimes it can go deeper than that, right? So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I think it's completely normal to have like excitement versus nervousness versus a little bit of anxiety. I always tell families that a little bit of anxiety is a good thing because it can keep us on our toes. But when it starts to get a little bit out of hand, and this is where I deploy the expertise of the caregiver, because you are the expert in your child. When you start seeing changes in their sleep pattern, in their eating habits, if they start getting nightmares, if they start asking reassuring questions more often, even after you give them like simple answers. For example, your son is starting a new school and he might ask many, many questions, and that's completely normal. Or if he can't sleep the night before, that is completely normal as well. We have to normalize the emotions, right? And a lot of emotions can coexist at the same time. That's another thing that I try to teach parents. Like, you can be nervous and be excited about seeing your friends and starting a new school year. But when you start, for example, also exhibiting, for example, we see it a lot in our hospital, physical symptoms in the absence of a medical diagnosis. It's like headaches, stomach aches, vomiting. Some younger kiddos, when they're very stressed out, they can also get fevers, extremely fatigued or tired. These are all little red flags to look out for, to see, maybe this is not the normal jitterness or the normal excitement, and it can lead up to a clinical anxiety. But clinical anxiety is way different. It's, when it's like prolonged time of these symptoms of sweaty hands, or some kids get very hyperactive and they might get confused with ADHD, when in reality it's just like nervous energy that they don't know how to manage yet. They can become very irritable as well, like very cranky in the morning and snappy, or talking back to parents. That's usually what, we talk about. I know right now on the screen we have, like, for example, being very afraid of being away from parents. This is very typical in the younger kiddos. I think I recall one of you saying pre-K, the kids are going to start pre-K. So they might not be accustomed to being away from grandma or mom or dad, and they're going to be, staying a prolonged time with a new person, a new space. So they can be, very scared of this. They can see crying, screaming, tantrums. In my general experience, it's really funny. And sometimes when you talk to teachers as well, oh, he was fine 5 minutes after you left him. But then the parents go to the cars crying and sobbing, and, oh my goodness, is my child having separation anxiety? And it might as well be a little bit, but don't be afraid to check also with yourself and how you're transmitting that anxiety to your child, especially when it's like the first school, first time they go away, new school. So yes, those are little red flags.
So what kind of things do we do if we notice some of what you're talking about that's a little bit more than the normal, behavior? When should parents say, okay, I'm noticing this is lasting a little longer, or it's a little bit more extreme? What kind of steps should they take?
Well, my personal favorite is don't wait until that happens to seek out help or deploy any of the strategies that we might talk about today. Prevention is key. So, for example, you guys have like if I heard correctly, like a week left before your own children start school. So this is a perfect time. I always recommend, ideally in a perfect world, 2 weeks, but if not, a week before, to start defining with your child, like make them part of this process, a healthy, realistic routine that fits within your family dynamic. For example, we don't want to try to aim for things that are unrealistic, but for example, let's start a new sleep hygiene. I know in the summertime, we're a little bit more lax and relaxed when it comes to sleep times and, tablet and video games. So a week before, it will be a very good idea to start setting limits so children know boundaries and when is it that they need to stop and go to sleep. For anybody from kiddos as young as 2 to teenagers, a healthy sleep hygiene routine. For example, go to shower before, play some music, read a story with your parent or caregiver. Some kiddos love guided imagery or guided meditations with different free apps that exist all around the web. Something that it can cue their brain into knowing, oh, it's time to go to sleep. Because sometimes it's very hard to just say, okay, go to sleep. And then the child has been playing with blue lights or video games and things like that. And their brain doesn't get the memo that it's time to go to sleep. So we need, as caregivers, to provide them with that routine that makes it easier for them to fall asleep. That is number one, healthy, realistic routine.
Excellent. And you know what? I'd like to go ahead and bring in our guest who's a working mom, also a pharmacist. Her name is Michelle Barney, because she has got these routines down. I actually got to spend some of my morning with her and how she and her husband get her kiddos ready to go out the door. So welcome to you, Michelle. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Hi.
Hi.
And so, Michelle, as you're listening to this and those signs, talk to me about, because I know you've just you're in that transition period right now, right, of going from what Dr. Villani-Capo was talking about, going from summer to school. And tell us about what's worked for you.
So it's so funny, as she was speaking, I kept nodding because I was like, this is exactly what I've been trying to instill. And so my kids started school last Friday. And so by starting on a Friday, it was one of those things where I was like, okay, well, I can use the earlier part of this week to get us back into that routine. And so we definitely did, bedtime. We set the bedtime and we let them know, like, that way we set the bedtime and we told them so they can check the clocks also, so they can be part of the process. And then we did the same thing. We limited the screen time. We started, a book before bed. We lay in bed and we'll just talk to them before they go to sleep. So creating that routine, and then same thing in the morning, getting them up and getting them dressed and getting them moving. Whereas before in the summer, we had more time to just kind of go with the flow.
And just to let everybody know, Michelle, your children are younger. They're 4 or 5 years old. So we're talking about elementary age, kindergarten, kind of getting them for the first time, right? Getting ready to take on school.
Yeah. So we have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they are excited to go to school. But it's one of those things where just getting them back into that routine can be difficult. And it's interesting when the doctor was talking as well about separation anxiety. So my daughter walks into the classroom and she's happy as can be to go to school. My son is the one where he'll clutch my hand until that last minute, and you'll see like a teardrop come down. And so I leave and my heart, is heavy at that point. But the teachers always say exactly what the doctor said. 2 minutes later, he's perfectly fine. I just have to keep telling myself that, he's okay.
You know what helps with that, actually? If he has a little lunchbox or even in his backpack, you put little notes or a little thing that is just between you and him, like a little pebble that says mom or love, and something physical that they can touch and it's very concrete. So if they get scared or anxious, you tell them, like, go to see your backpack or grab this little stone. And that little transition period, it just gives them a sense of comfort and validation that it's okay to feel that way as well.
I love that. I need to do the note.
Who doesn't like a written note? I mean, that.
It makes a world of a difference for anybody.
Yeah. And Doctor, one of your colleagues gave me an excellent idea that I actually just did yesterday was take your kid to his new school ahead of
Yeah.
time. Like I spoke with her and I said, oh, well, there's an orientation. And she was like, no, do it, ahead of time before the orientation. Because at the orientation, even at the meet and greet, things are crazy. People are tense. And so, stopped by at a time where we could just look at it. And she spoke of being positive and excited about that. I just, those are such great things.
I think more so after the pandemic where children were, at home and weren't used to like going to school every year. Like a lot of children grew up that transition, like elementary school, middle school, even high school, those transitioning years during the pandemic. So if you know that your child is more on the anxious side or more on the I need to be prepared side, you guys are the expert in your children. So what will benefit them the most. But it's always a good idea to go to those teacher meet and greets, to take them. Sometimes they will do like the actual schedule and you can like follow their classroom so they can know where to go. Because a lot of the anxiety, and this goes for adults as well, is I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what my day is going to look like. What if I get lost? What if nobody's there to help me? What if I don't remember? So actually doing that and taking them and going like for a little trial run without the added stressor of this is the new school year, new day, actually is very beneficial. And going through the routine in the morning, like we're going to wake up at this time, we're going to have breakfast. The most important thing with routine is consistency. And I know that's the hardest part for parents because of course life happens and it's really, really hard. But the more consistent you can be with that routine, the more the child is like, oh, I expect this. I have to wake up at this time, even if I'm cranky. I need to eat breakfast. I know what's expected of me. Therefore, my anxiety can also be lowered.
Michelle, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Oh, sorry, Marissa. Go ahead.
No, Jewel, go ahead.
No, Michelle, yeah, because you're.
Yeah, no, and the consistency thing is so key because even my daughter, I'll say like, oh my gosh, can you go get dressed? And she's like, Mom, we have to eat breakfast first. Like she knows the routine. And so I'm like, no, she's right. Like we got to stick with the routine. And so giving yourself plenty of time, getting up an extra, especially now while the routine's probably a little bit slower as you're easing into it. Getting up at least like 30 minutes before you normally would helps a lot. So that way we're not rushed. I'm not like, hurry, put shoes on, get out the door. We got to go. It's nice that we have time for the kids to sit and eat. We have time for the kids to get ready, calm any nerves, and then get out the door. So definitely the routine, I think, is huge for them in the morning to help with their stress and our stress.
Absolutely.
And doctor, I know that I feel like a lot of these, this advice is for the younger kids, but what do we do for the middle school, for the high school kids that maybe don't want to let their parents, know that they're feeling anxious? So is there any different suggestions that you would make for the older kids that want to make it seem like they've got it figured out?
So I feel like the suggestions are the same, but we can tweak it a little bit. For example, for teenagers that are more, introverted or not like big talkers, I feel like we've lost the art of the family dinner time and how important it is. Even if your family looks very different, even if it's just mom or grandparents, whoever it might be, I feel strongly that preventing and having those conversations before school starts, even if your child sits on the table and only does the shoulder language is what I call it, where it's like, how do you feel? I don't know. Do you want to talk about it? No. Just because your child doesn't want to talk about it doesn't mean that we have to give up as caregivers. So even showing them, oh, I remember when I was your age, I would get very nervous about, not seeing my friends the whole summer and reinitiating, for example, those conversations the first day. You might get a response, you might not. Another tip might be asking them open-ended questions without inserting your own assumptions. Like, for example, oh, I bet you're very scared, or I bet it can be very exciting. Just, how do you feel? Do you have any concerns? Is something, help them problem solve? I feel like also as caregivers, especially in my community, Latino community, is just like we try to fix everything for them instead of letting them fail and trial and help them problem solve. So I think that all can be done in the family dinner table, even if it's in the morning, 15 minutes, even if it's in the afternoon for 10 minutes. But for teenagers specifically, it's a lot. Being a teenager nowadays is very hard. I don't think parents realize how hard it is to be a teenager in 2022. So validating their feelings, validating their thoughts, asking them open-ended questions, seeing where they got you, because they might surprise and they one day out of 20 that you ask, maybe one day they open up and they talk to you And that can be the conversation that shifts everything for them.
And you know what I found too, just to add on, is when I ask the open-ended questions, if I get the shoulder shrug or I get like, oh, my day was good, it plants the seeds. So later on, when I'm putting them to bed, when I'm, helping them do another task, they'll then just, everything will come out about their day. So it's one of those things where asking the question early, you may not get the response you necessarily are looking for, but they think about it. And then when they're ready to talk, they will, and it'll just all come out. So I found that sort of works as well. Even if you're not going to get the response, still ask, because you don't know when they're going to be ready to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's about establishing a culture of the home that we talk about it. If we're going to ask our kids questions, it's important that we also are open and are able to model that behavior, for example. Because if your child says, I don't know, how did your day look like? Be able to express and say, you know what, it was very stressful, but you know what I did? I took a break and I went for a walk. And then you can insert coping skills that are very adaptive and healthy. And you can model that for your child since very early in their childhood, by the way. But it's important that it's a two-way street. It's not always like the parent's going to ask and the child must answer and then it cuts off. We need to revive that art of conversation, being vulnerable with our own kids.
I feel like that's really speaking to me, even with my 5-year-old, because sometimes, usually when I ask her how her day went or what she's like, good, and then she goes off to do whatever she was doing. And later on in the day, she'll do that, Michelle. She'll like just open up and be like, well, let me tell you what happened in class. And sometimes I'm in the middle of something and I'm not ready to receive the information. I'm like, where's this coming from? But that's a great reminder that this is the time that she's ready. So even if you're doing laundry or trying to, get your son to go to the bathroom or whatever, it is important to just kind of slow down and listen, right? I mean, if we want them, like you're saying, to respond to us, we need to be able to respond to them whenever they're ready. So I appreciate that reminder for myself.
And being present during those conversations as well. Like you were saying, laundry, it's okay to do laundry and take a minute and say, okay, honey, I have to do laundry, but I'm listening. And make sure that they know that you're listening by, looking at them in the eye from time to time, asking them questions, validating them, following up with a comment. Like, for example, you say, oh, my day went good. Oh, what made it good?
Right.
Like, what made your day good? And that is very important for children too. Like, oh, they're listening to what I have to say.
So it just so happens this week that my niece, Marissa's daughter, is staying with me. And so I'm getting to enjoy those conversations between her and my son. They're both 4, they're 6 months apart. And I try to ask them questions. So they're at camp together and I ask them, well, who did you sit next to at lunch? And just the answers they come up with are just so, wildly different. We didn't sit at a table or we did this or just, it's just so random, but I try to catch them off guard. So to really make them think to say something.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Being creative in your conversations. And even if they give you a silly answer, you can lean on that silliness and, insert humor and just enter as well your value system as family. Like, for example, if they bring up a trouble, for example, oh, a kid was mean to me, don't leave it at that. Make sure to address it and make sure you feel comfortable on establishing those values that you want to instill in them. For example, so how did you react? Okay. And then, for example, if they say I was mean back, you can take that opportunity and say, well, what do you think that helped or contribute to the problem? And you help them problem solve and you help them be creative and you help them come up with solutions to everyday things. We cannot protect our children from life. We can't protect our children from experiencing negative moods or negative situations. But during those conversations, even if it's while folding laundry, even if it's when potty training our 2-year-old, those conversations is very important. And it teaches children we can talk about our problems. I have a parent or a caregiver that will listen and will help me problem solve and not just give me the solutions and talk at me,
And Michelle, you have, speaking of humor, you have something that you do with your family. Tell us about that.
So when I hit the roadblock, when I'm asking them a question or whatnot, I always am like, okay, let's just change the subject. I'm not going to pry more about school. And I'll say tell me a joke. And they think this is the greatest thing ever because my 5-year-old will hear jokes and like recite them. My 4-year-old just makes something up off the cuff, but it gets the conversation flowing. And so we're all laughing. They feel comfortable. They let their guards down. And then I'm able to say like, segue it back in a way to having them tell me about their day, who they played with, what they learned, anything, and that generally does it for us in terms of just having them, laugh, relax, getting them to that point. And then they end up, opening up, and I get a little bit more about their day. But also, like the doctor had said, so yesterday, actually, my daughter came home from school, and she was joking with me about like, I was like, oh, what'd you do today? And she kept joking about stuff. But then she actually told me about something that she overheard that was more serious. And we talked through it. We problem solved. I asked her, how it made her feel and whatnot. So it was a really good moment for both of us to just like problem solve and talk through if a situation like this does come up, how do we handle it? How do we feel? Those sorts of things. So I could tell like she was joking earlier, but then when she got serious and she brought this up, I was like, okay, this is where I need to focus, and she needs my attention right now.
That's good.
And doctor, I have a question. I know we were talking about being proactive and, a couple weeks ahead of time in a perfect world, getting ahead of things and talking to our kids about getting ready for school. Let's say, it's 2 or 3 weeks after school has started and parents are still seeing, the anxiety in their child or those kind of, concerning behaviors. At what point do you seek professional help? At what point do you take, another step to try to help your kid in that transition?
Of course, that's an excellent question. And it usually depends on the resources that you have at hand at school, or for example, it's really important for me to also encourage caregivers to create that sense of tribe and support system within the school system. So talking to your teachers, talking to the support staff or the principal, for example, if you have a child that has a history of struggling with anxiety or depression or learning difficulties, it's really important that we keep the communication going with our tribe at school and make sure that line of communication is always open, because that teacher can also help your child, for example, with simple reminders or special accommodations. I have a child that goes to a private school, and I know private schools don't have the benefits of the 504s or the IEPs or those like specific accommodations, but they do tend to, for example, give this specific patient that I'm thinking about the opportunity to have like a little signal. They do like a little ear thing. And that means that I'm very anxious right now. And they're able to just walk out 5 minutes with a pass, go to the nurse's station and practice a little mindfulness for 5 minutes, a guided imagery exercise for 5 minutes, and then come back. But that is a child that suffers from panic attacks and OCD. So those are very real clinical diagnoses that demand your child to have special accommodations at school. And that is only able to happen if you communicate with the school staff and communicate with your teachers. If your child doesn't have a history, and this is the first time, for example, I know one of you is a new school, and maybe this new school has new demands, social demands, or it's a little bit more challenging academically, and your child starts experiencing clinical anxiety, it's really important to, number one, go to your pediatrician. That is like always like the first line of defense. Talk to them about it. They always have like resources in the community. They can better help you navigate. Or if it's an extreme situation where, we've been going to therapy or the counseling or a school psychologist haven't been very successful, sometimes medication for anxiety is needed, but it's not always the common thing. That is just in extreme cases.
Gotcha. And I just want to ask Michelle Barney if you've got any final thoughts, because I know you've got to get to work here. So please share with us if you do.
Yeah, no, and one thing, I mean, especially now with work and the kids being back, is routine. I can't stress that enough. For me to have a day that flows smoothly, I have to make sure my kids have a morning that they get out of the door easily. So routine. And then same thing at pickup. So when I pick them up, I like them, give them my attention, put my phone down, make sure they know there's still some work that I'm going to have to do, but I want them when I am with them in the car, have that full attention. Let them know I'm here. Let them just talk about what they want to talk about from their day. And then let them know what the routine is for that night. Do we have any baseball practice? Do we have, what do we have that evening? And then when are we going to have dinner? What are we going to have for dinner? So just like involving them, that seems to work out really well for us. So just keeping that morning and night routine going, I think it serves the kids. It seems to help my children, and I think it serves the kids well.
Awesome. Well, Michelle, thanks so much for being with us. It was a pleasure to be with you and meet your beautiful family this morning. And we look forward to sharing more tips or seeing more tips from you later on this week on NBC6. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
for all your input.
And Doctor, let's go ahead and talk about the prevalence of anxiety. I want to get back to that because it is really quite common when we look at some of those statistics.
Yeah, so according to the CDC's latest statistic reports, the most common clinical diagnosis for children at the ages of 3 to 17 is number one, ADHD with a 9.8% of prevalence. Second being anxiety, so very common with 9.4. Behavioral problems, 8.9, and depression being 4.4. It's also very important that we've seen that after the pandemic, these diagnoses have been occurring more in conjunction with each other, meaning a child that suffers from depression will have anxiety, or a child that has ADHD might have anxiety as well and depression. So we cannot look at these diagnoses separate from each other because usually they can happen together. They're not, different. So it's very important that we know that the prevalence is here. Like 9.8, that's for me, that's alarming. So it's very important that we know the red flags to look out for, help our children when we know there's a diagnosis. Avoiding the problem will not make it go away. I always joke about it now with the Bruno song. We don't talk about Bruno. That's a metaphor I use with my kiddos. Like, just because we don't talk about Bruno doesn't mean that Bruno just disappears. Like, Bruno is still there, right? So just because we don't want our children to have anxiety, just because, as a family, we're not comfortable having these conversations, doesn't mean that the symptoms and the issues will magically disappear. So it's very important to address it. Even so, more in adolescents, it's very important for them, if they have a diagnosis, for them to be empowered and say, listen, I have anxiety. I'm not anxious. I'm not depressive. I have depression. I have anxiety. I have a little bit of trouble with, for example, executive functioning skills, which is our number one, ADHD. Kiddos that have issues completing tasks, completing homework, maintaining themselves organized, their rooms are a mess, or they don't know how to do a step-by-step process in math. So all those things are common in ADHD or learning difficulties. So as a caregiver, it's really important that we address it, say, okay, we have a diagnosis that are done, by the way, by assessment. It's really important that we receive diagnosis by a proper way with standardized testing, standardized assessment, protocols, questionnaires for the teachers, questionnaire for the caregiver. Early assessment is key. That's why always a well child visit in the summertime is so key and so important. Some parents might think it's just, to get the vaccine information and just see if everything's okay. But during those assessments, usually they give you questionnaires and they can red flag any potential symptoms that might need or warrant further assessment. And I always encourage parents to follow through with those recommendations, because if we can identify something earlier on, it is way more helpful than addressing it when the social demands are higher.
You may have just answered this question, but is there an age range that it's more likely for a child to be diagnosed with ADHD or depression? Or, I'm thinking like an 8-year-old versus, you mentioned an adolescent like 13 or 14, or is it across the board? It can happen at any time.
So the latest statistics from the CDC is very broad. So it's 3 to 17. Usually that's the prevalence, but we do know that adolescent is a key time where the inner demands and the social demands, and while having more access to social media and more access to information across the globe. For example, they know what's happening in Ukraine, they know what's happening in Africa. So a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old might not be as vulnerable in that sense. So, but we do see a higher risk in adolescence than early childhood, but that does not mean that it does not happen.
Yeah. And Doctor, I'm just seeing some viewer comments as they're watching this live. One coming to us from Sharon Mapri Silverio Vargas. She says, my son has a problem staying asleep throughout the night. He is 13. What would you recommend for mom here?
So usually that comes accompanied by I always ask, what is he doing right before bed? If right before bed we're doing exercise or we're doing video games or we're watching TV, our brains are not able to rest or have the memo that it's time to go to sleep. So even if you fall asleep, your brain activity is still really high. So it's very important that they have at least, and I know again, it's really hard nowadays. I acknowledge how hard it is, but at least 40 to an hour before bed, if they want to do anything, listen to music, read a book, do something that doesn't involve blue light. So our brain is able to rest and start, tapering down. If the problem continues and, they do everything right, like the sleep hygiene routine, and they do it like an hour before and the problem continues, it's also worth talking to your pediatrician about it, just because we don't want to, I always want to rule out any biological or physiological reason like a sleep disorder or sleep apnea that can really impact your child.
Well, thank you so much. A wealth of knowledge. Some of this stuff, it's like, I think I know, but hearing it again just reinforces it and gets us all ready in this really critical time where we're getting into the start of the new year. So I just want to thank everybody who's been watching, the mom for the comment. That was a great thing to be able to mention and have the doctor respond to. So we just want to thank you for your time, and we appreciate being able to talk about this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor, and thank you to Dr. Marina Villani-Capo, and also thank you to our excellent producers, Daniela and Monica. We really appreciate you, ladies. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for watching. And feel free to share with this. And we're so glad. Just love having conversations like this. We learn so much. So, Doctor, thanks.
Thank you everybody just for being part of Moms with a Mic.
Yeah. Ciao.
Bye.